And we will start with Mirna Mazia from Croatia. She will talk about quantifying the 3D impact of renewable energy infrastructure development on habitats using area leader technology. So let's see what's behind that. Mirna, please.
So, hi everyone. I'm glad that I'm opening this session and that I'm not opening the whole conference as I did last year. So this is a much easier position. Yes, when I was talking with my colleagues a few days ago, they asked me like, what are you going to present? And they said like, it's bats and wind turbines, wind farms, something. And yes, you cannot read it from the topic, but behind all this are bats and wind farms. So let's start. Let me introduce you to this, what my thoughts were. So we know that wind farms are giving a bit of a pressure on the biodiversity, and more projects are in remote natural areas such as mountains and forests. So my focus was on how to deal with the development in the forested areas. So usually when assessing the impacts, we use maps and we use like a two-dimensional perspective of a habitat. So we draw a polygon of the future wind farm, and then we say like, okay, we are using so much hectares of an area. But my thoughts were like, the forest is not a two-dimensional area, it's a space, it's a three-dimensional habitat for species which are flying species and which are arboreal species. So they use the whole vertical perspective of that habitat. So it's not just a plain terrain, it's a three-dimensional, it's a vertical perspective that animals use. Of course, this is where my bat background comes, and where I was thinking that bats use corridors in the forest below the canopy level. They use the trees, they fly in the canopy level, above the canopy level. So I wanted to see how can I assess and quantify these three-dimensional impacts. So the goal was to find the methodology, how to do that. So I know there's a three-dimensional impact, but how can I assess that? We've chosen the wind power plant in Croatia, which is in the mountainous area, which was a bit of my biggest problem because it was the first wind farm in Croatia built in forests. And from my perspective, it was not the right place to build a wind farm, and we wanted to do something about it and to try to develop a methodology how to properly assess that in advance, not to do that afterwards when we see that the damage is already done. So the study area is mixed habitat, and we wanted to take into account all the infrastructure like access roads, wind turbine as itself, the plateaus, and all the other parts of the wind farm. So the methodology was conducted in a few steps. So we were using pretty new maps that were placed in Croatia in 2023. We had a high-resolution aerial lidar data. We used the digital model and the digital surface model, which are with a spatial resolution with 1 meter, which is pretty great. And we got a highly detailed point cloud, which is suitable for classification of the vegetation cover. So we have a lot of details of the habitat where the wind farm is placed. The second part was how to classify those points that we have. So we were extracting from that raw lidar data, we wanted to classify some parts of so we had like bare relief, meadows and forests. We didn't want to go into more details because this is just a development of the methodology. So you can see that we could easily see the wind turbines itself. You can see them turning, so the time that the leader was taking photos, you could see that they're turning. You can see the bare relief, which is a digital model, and you can see the forest vegetation as an example of what it looks like. So the next step was extraction of the vegetation cover. So how to calculate from this two-dimensional extent, how to get the vegetation cover. We had a question because it was already built. The wind farm was already there. So we couldn't calculate the losses. So we just made a plateau and then we just switched it to like 100 meters to a left where this arrow is pointing. So we calculated the same habitat, but just with a shift. And the most important and the most crucial step was meshing. I didn't know what's meshing, but my colleague did the whole process, so that's why there's always a group of people doing the work, why it's important. So just to explain a bit, I'm a biologist, so I had to explain to myself, so I'll try to do that also for you. So when taking the photos, you get numerous points, but you need to make a tree out of those points. So meshing would be making a volume out of a set of points. So that was the main step in this process. So a bit about the results. So we had a total area which is 11.26 hectares. So that's not so big, but it's a huge area. But when you calculate the volume, then the number is in a different perspective, but you get a number. It's not just an area, but a volume, the area which was lost. And now the number is pretty huge. An average height of trees was 27.69, so it's a pretty old oak forest and beech forest, so it's really suitable and perfect for bats. So considering the forest cover is only 30.4%, the mean habitat loss per hectares were counted in cubic meters per hectare. So we got a view of how much forest, the volume of the forest was lost. The remaining portions of those areas were meadows, bare rock, and we calculated the volume loss, and it's negligible for the meadows and the bare relief. So I think this is a crucial part of the results, yet pretty easy, like a simple graph, but I think it made a point of all the research and the whole idea that we had behind this. So when you look at this map, you see that the area, the two-dimensional, the cubic, not the cubic meters, the hectares that were lost for the forests were 3.43. So it seems like it's not a big loss. Then you have meadows, much bigger, so it's almost twice, but okay, it's a bit bigger. And then you have a bare rock, which is a bit smaller and the half of the forests. But when you put it in a perspective of a volume of an area, then you get a completely different view of the same habitat. So now you see that we lost a lot of habitats, the forest habitats, regarding if we're taking out the volume. So it's, you can see 10 times more of the habitat which is suitable for bats. And then you can see that the meadows are 10 times less and the bare rock is almost nothing. So getting this perspective completely changes the way that we should look forested habitats regarding the wind farm development and regarding the flying arboreal animals such as bats primarily in my thoughts, but also it can be encountered for birds or any other species which use habitat forests like that. So to conclude, although this wind power plant that we analyzed is relatively small regarding the two-dimensional area, the significant habitat loss can be seen through the third dimension, this height. The results reveal substantial forest habitat loss due to the wind farm development. And it's really crucial that we need to more comprehensively adapt to this need to environmental impact assessment to take into account this third dimensional spatial analysis. And Consequently, such third dimension assessment of impacts should be conducted prior, so it should be a first step. We should analyze that first, because when you build a wind farm in the forest, it's over. We've already lost it. It's loss of habitat, that third dimension. And my final conclusion would be that in forested areas, habitat loss should be quantified as a volume of space rather than the area. So that was my thought when I entered this research, the idea, and it came out that it was true, that I was right, that when you do the different kind of perspective, you get a completely different results. So yeah, thank you for your attention. And, I think the questions are at the end, so yes.
Are at the end. You save some time, you get an extra question.
Yes.
All right. So the next talk will be from Sophie Ben-Boujema from EDF in France about 3D, deep learning simulation of seabird trajectory to assess offshore wind farm impacts. And let me see whether I can find this, the presentation. Yes. Sophie, please.
I think they removed it. Up. So, hi everyone, my name is Sophie Ben-Boujema. I'm a third-year PhD student at both EDF and the RRD, and today I'm happy to present part of my work on deep learning simulation of seabird trajectories to assess offshore wind farms impact. So the context and main starting point of this study is kind of obvious. It's the ongoing development of offshore wind farms in Europe and the fact that those wind farms share space with seabirds. Here you have the example of northern gannet followed by telemetry by a study from Lane et al. Because they share space, the offshore wind farms may have potential impacts on the seabirds, including collision risk, barrier effects, so added energy expenditures, and modification of space usage, ranging from repulsion to attraction. And our question is, for the future wind farms amongst all the ones we have planned in Europe, how can we predict the impact that we will have on the seabirds? Thankfully, we are not starting from scratch. We have a lot of seabirds monitoring studies in Europe. Most of those are observation studies by ship or plane, but we have more and more radar studies and GPS tracking studies. So you catch birds, especially during the breeding season, you put a GPS tracker on them, and you follow them around for 1 week to 2 weeks, depending on the species. Unfortunately, nothing is ever simple in science. So studies such as this one from Disco et al. In 2016 show that, of course, the effect of wind farm change between species, but also for one species, for example, the black-legged kittiwake, among wind farm you have very different impacts which are observed. It ranges from strong avoidance to indifference to strong attraction to the wind farms. So this may be due to study design, or this may be due to site specificity and the fact that environmental characteristics of those wind farms are not similar. And of course, seabirds do not only react to offshore wind farms, but to their environment as a whole. So the question is, how can we better take this specificity into account in our modeling and predictive approaches? What we wanted to do was to take advantage of existing dataset, and particularly of GPS tracking dataset, because with GPS tracking you have very precise data and you follow the bird during his whole movement, not only around the wind farm. Those data are the one most likely to tell us how and why the seabird is where it is and what are its decisions. Their main drawback is that it's a very small sample size. So if possible, we would like to unify all those data in one unified model, generalist model, to approximate the relationship between seabird movement and their environment. To do that, we wanted to explore the possibility offered by deep learning, and more specifically by generative adversarial network, which is a type of IM model. And the task we had given it is, okay, as an input, I will give you an environmental map, a condition of the environmental you have around your colonies, and a noise, and you must predict me a realistic trajectory. Once it does that, what I call a realistic trajectories is that I look at its characteristics and I compare it to real trajectories. So we look at characteristics which will be useful for offshore wind farm assessment, such as maximal distance to the colony, total distance and duration of the tracks, and which area it is frequenting. Of course, we do all that, and the first question we ask ourselves when we wanted to construct the model is, okay, what do we put in here? Which environmental condition will we be looking at? So there is a wide range of environmental factors influencing seabirds' movement. When you take the northern gannets, for example, you have biotic and abiotic factor. The first one are individual characteristic, the age, the sex, and even its individual component. And of course, you have food resource distribution because they are trying to feed their chick and themselves. Unfortunately, we don't know where pelagic fishes are most of the time, so this is not the data that we really have. There's also intraspecific competition. In northern gannets, the bigger the colony, the further they tend to go. Interspecific competition because they are not the only big bird in the sea. And a wide range of physical variables such as bathymetry, tides, temperature, chlorophyll, amongst others. And sometimes they are considered the proxy for food resource distribution. You have wind in pretty obvious manner, but at different scales. And of course, human activities such as offshore wind farms and fishing activity. So to start and construct the model, we wanted a variable that we could easily understand and validate to make sure that the model correctly understood the relationship between movement and the map we put as input. And for that, we chose bathymetry because it contains information on the sea-land repartition, and we know that the gannets in our dataset never go on land. So it's pretty easy to validate the model because we just ask it to simulate trajectories on a map it has never seen, and it's supposed to go on sea. So here are some results. So those are the real tracks. And for each colony, I give the model the bathymetry map around the colony I want to simulate. So I've got 5 different bathymetry maps. And those are the simulated tracks by the model. It's trained over all colonies at once. And you can see that it adapts spatial distribution of the tracks between colonies. So it understands something. Once we see that, we want to dig a little deeper and see if those tracks are good or not. And so we can trace them out and verify that they are loops, because seabirds are central place foragers during the reproduction period, and that the global characteristics follow those of real data. So here you have the example of total distance and duration, and the simulated tracks distribution is in orange, the real in blue, and you can see that it kind of follows those distribution and has the same modes, and also it depends on the colony you ask it to simulate. Okay, so we've got this model which does the link between the two. And now we want to test it a bit further and to add more and more variable because bathymetry is a good starting point, but obviously we won't stop there. Here I'll show you one example of a variable we added, which we wanted to simulate a repulsive effect. Unfortunately, in our dataset, we do not have information on the offshore wind farms, so we wanted to still do a simulation study, so we did our own artificial dataset. What we did is we took the real data and we split them in two. We chose a zone, and we have one set of data going through the zone and another set of real data avoiding the zone. And this time, the model has as an input the bathymetry map of the colony. Is there a zone or not, and where is the zone located at, and its size? And it has to tell where the trajectories are supposed to go. So we wanted to assess its capabilities to take 2 inputs at once and to simulate an avoidance effect. So some results for bass rock only, but we did this once again on all colonies at once. So here are occurrences of the real tracks, and here are the occurrences of the simulated tracks, without and with the repulsive zone. You can see that it, same thing, adapts the spatial distribution and direction of the flight. It kind of resembles the real tracks. But also when we look a bit closer at how it understands this avoidance, we can see that it correctly follows the trend of the fact that the further you go into the zone and the closer to the center, the more you have an avoidance, which is something that we arbitrarily chose in our simulation exercise. And depending on where the zone is, because we can move the zone around as we want, the closer it is to the colony and the stranger the relationship is. Once again, it's a purely arbitrary distribution, and we can see that the model tried to emulate it a little. So it's kind of promising for future usage once we have real data of avoidance of a specific zone. No further improvement of the model would also lead to having more and more data, because the more environmental variables you put in the model, the more data you need, because you are splitting your data in smaller and smaller fractions. One easy, and I think this with comments, way to do that is to do a multi-species models to augment our data set. So we have began trying to do a multi-species models with gannets and gulls data. And you can see that the models can do both of them. And when I ask for gulls data at the gannet colony, it does smaller tracks. So it can simulate 2 species at once, but this is really a work in progress, so that's just preliminary results. So in conclusion, we wanted to build a generalist model to simulate and predict seabird behavior depending on environmental conditions. This will be an open source, pretty easy to use model, even though it's not that easy to construct. The perspectives are, of course, to add more and more environmental variables and more species to the model to be able to do those kind of exercise when in the future, if we give the model all the sites specificity of colony, we wanted to be able to simulate its tracks with and without offshore wind farm and compare the two. At each block, as you can see, we validate the model successively, and we want it to be good at prediction. So what we do is we remove a colony from the training data set, ask it to predict track, and we check if the model is getting better as we add environmental data or not. If it is, the data is probably relevant to our study. So thanks a lot to the data contributor who gave us those data. Those are not easy to gather, to pose solutions for financing the project, and of course to the committee organization of the CWW. And thank you for your attention.
Yeah, merci beaucoup, many thanks. So we managed go from the forest to the sea. Now we are going underwater, so still with air-breathing animals, and we will have Joost Kemper from the Netherlands talking about monitoring harbor porpoise presence and underwater sound in an offshore wind farm in the Dutch North Sea. So where do I... Joost, come on, we don't lose time. Please.
Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Joost Brinkhemper from Waterproof, and I will be presenting a research that we conducted together with Wageningen Marine Research, and which is funded by the WOSEP, which is the offshore wind research program in the Netherlands. So I will be presenting a research that we conduct in the Borssele wind farm. This is a wind farm in the southern part of the Dutch North Sea on the border with Belgium. And we conduct their research since 2019, since the construction phase of the wind farm, specifically looking at, in the construction phase, the disturbance of harbor porpoises from the area. And now in the operational phase, we're monitoring harbor porpoise presence, whether they are returning to the wind farm, how they make use of the wind farm, if they are, whether they are foraging there or not. And we do that since 2021. With at those 14 locations inside the wind farm and outside the wind farm. You can see here that at all 14 locations we have those F-pods. Those are echolocation click detectors. I will tell something more in the next slide. And at 6 locations we have them co-located with sound recorders. So we also monitor the underwater sound in that area. Yeah, so those click detectors, harbor porpoises use echolocation clicks to be able to forage, to explore their surroundings, to navigate, to communicate. And we have those click detectors that can specifically detect those echolocation clicks. And that tells us something about the presence of those animals and their behavior, whether they are foraging or not. And with those click detectors, we can detect harbor porpoises up to 300 meters from the device. Now we specifically designed this network to be able to be combined with the navigational buoys that are already in the area, especially outside the wind farm. There's a lot of fisheries still going on, so there's really a need of a robust monitoring system. So we have combined it with, in collaboration with the Dutch government to deploy those systems together with those navigational buoys. Yeah, and if we look at underwater sound that we measure, we can see here, those are spectrograms that show the sound levels at different frequencies on the y-axis and time on the x-axis, and here 1 month of data is shown for outside the wind farm and inside the wind farm. And yeah, we can see different characteristics of the underwater sound in those spectrograms. If you look at the top spectrogram outside the wind farm, you can see a lot of vertical lines in the data. That's a lot of vessels passing the measurement station. So you can see that the sound level is changing continuously with all the vessels that are there. If you look inside the wind farm, you can see more horizontal lines in the data. That means sound levels are more stable. And they actually, you can see that they are correlated with the wind that's there. So with increasing wind speeds, you can see an increasing sound level, which means that those are correlated with the turbine noise. And now I presented this correlation 2 years ago at CWW. And here percentiles are shown, which show at how much percentage of the time certain sound levels are exceeded for the frequencies. And outside the wind farm, you can see louder sound levels at around 60 hertz, very typical for vessel noise. And inside the wind farm, it's more irregular because of those like more tonal sounds from the vibrations of the turbines. And we can see in general that inside the wind farm sound levels are 2 to 6 decibels lower than outside the wind farm. Now, if we look at the porpoise presence data, we can see detections of porpoises throughout the area all the time. And 25% of all the hours that we measured, we measure presence of harbor porpoises. And so we did statistical analysis, including a lot of environmental variables to see if we can see temporal or spatial correlations in the data. And we can see temporal, we can see on different timescales that harbor porpoise presence can be explained. It can be explained on a more seasonal variety, so it's correlated with the water temperature. So when in winter, in spring, when the waters are colder, in this area there are more harbor porpoises present. We can also see on the tidal variations correlation, and also a daily correlation is there. So in the night, harbor porpoises are more active than during the day in this area. If you look at the spatial patterns, we see a slightly higher chance of detecting harbor porpoises inside the wind farm in comparison with outside. But the difference is very small, so it's at least good to say we don't see a negative correlation. But levels of harbor porpoise presence is more or less the same inside and outside the wind farm. So this is the preliminary conclusions from the first 2 years of data analysis. So we see significantly lower noise levels inside the wind farm. And we see inside the wind farm that noise levels are dominated by those by the turbine noise. The variation in porpoise activity, you can see seasonal, daily patterns with the tide. We think those are mostly related to the prey presence. With the environmental variables that we include in the model, we can only explain 5 to 14% of the variety in the variability of the porpoise presence that we measure. So there must be factors that we don't include. It's highly likely that this is due to prey availability in the area. And we see that the porpoise activity inside and outside the wind farm is of the same order of magnitude. Now, the next step? We are still monitoring in the Borssele wind farm, so we will continue monitoring for 1 more year, and then combine all this data and do a more in-depth analysis. We will include foraging activity, so also not only look at porpoise presence, but also really look at when are they foraging in the area and where are they foraging. And we will look specifically, now we looked at presented noise and porpoise activity separately, but we also combine those to really look at when are porpoises disturbed by those noise levels, for example, by maintenance activities that are conducted inside the wind farm. So for future research in the Borssele wind farm, there was no baseline monitoring, so basically the first station was deployed exactly when construction phase started. lack of baseline data is really an issue, so that it should be included in follow-up projects. Now, what are we at the moment? We are we have more monitoring projects going on. So the Borssele wind farm was the first, started in 2019. We started 1 year ago in the Eco-Ende wind farm, monitoring, including a baseline period of a full year. That is just, now the construction is almost starting. We will have a poster presenting the baseline measurements later today. And we currently are measuring at a bit further north in a future offshore wind farm, and will deploy also a passive acoustic monitoring network in the future in the Dordewind area, where they will construct a wind farm in at least 3 or 4 years from now. So we have a really long baseline period to see what's currently how our porpoises and other cetaceans, how they are currently using the area. Thank you.
Many thanks, Joop. So that was brilliant timekeeping again. So now we are going completely underwater. We are getting a talk from Benoit Burgess, also from the Netherlands, monitoring of Atlantic cod and European lobster at two types of artificial reefs. Perfect. Please.
Thank you. Yes, so I will present a study that took place over 2 years, like at artificial reefs in an offshore wind farm in Borssele. So the similar one to that Just mentioned. And so there was 2 parts. There was a part on cod and a part on lobster, and it was mostly funded by Ørsted. And the background, as we know, is that there is an increasing number of offshore wind farms, and in the Netherlands, there is in the tenders there is more and more. The government is asking for like an ecological plan, and it always comes with like some monitoring. And for the Borssele offshore wind farm, basically there was put in place some nature inclusive measures, and basically this project came in this context. And in the map shows you where it is. So it's at the border of Belgium and in the Netherlands. And more specifically, it was a very local study. So I'm zooming in here, and the red dot is where it took place. So it's really around one single turbine. Yes, and artificial reefs in the form of concrete pipes were placed around the turbine. So this is just to show the type of pipes that were placed, but like each reef was made of like about 30 pipes of different diameters between 0.5 meter and 1 meter. And 4 reefs were placed back in 2020. So you can see on the map here, in the middle you have the monopile, and then you have the 4 different reefs, R01, R02, R03, and R04. And good to keep in mind is that the southern reefs also included like scour protection similar to the monopile. And we had 2 main research questions. First, is there specific behavior around the artificial reefs? And the second question is, what was the seasonal stay and fidelity to the reefs? And to answer these questions, we used acoustic telemetry, and more specifically, like through a fine mesh to do what we call a fine scale positioning, which is basically tracking the animal like over fine time and temporal scale. And for this, we deployed 16 receivers spaced between 250 and 200 meters. And we used tags, so it's a bit technical, the FEMCO tags, so transmitting with a transmit time between 50 and 100 seconds. And over this transmit time, we could track the animal for up to 270 days around that. And for the code, they were caught on site, and we used tags that transmitted like the pressure, so giving us information on depth, but also acceleration. And for lobsters, they were translocated, and the tags, they only transmitted pressure. So first, like showing the timeline for the different animals that were caught. So that was around the first year in 2021. We caught 45 individuals, and you can see that a lot of individuals stayed in the area, in the monitoring area. And remember that the monitoring area is quite local and specific. So here, overall, we had a very good residency in the first batch. The second batch was much shorter. Like first, we couldn't caught as many individuals. We caught only 19 because we caught many, but a lot were undersized. I mean, the catching took place a bit earlier, and also I think we had a much warmer sea temperature like in this season, which I think was a big explanatory factor. For lobsters, so yes, they were translocated, and we had a much shorter residency. I mean, and you can see here, it's from July to August, so we are talking about 1-2 months. And still, it was quite patchy. We had a lot of animals that left very early. And in the second tagging batch, we had animals that stayed more consistently, but it was still quite a short stay. In terms of processing, we used, so as I said, fine case positioning, and you can see on the right-hand side, like each dot is a position, and for each day, so it's jumping from one day to the next. So with the position, we could assess fidelity and residency. And further, we used some hidden Markov model to infer behavior. So locally active, locally inactive, in transit, or also hiding in the structures. And yeah, locally active is something that would relate most to feeding, I would say. In terms of site visiting and fidelity, at the bottom I've put a similar graph to before, but the color coding is different. Like each color corresponds to different sites, so with the different reefs. And you can see that the fish didn't jump from side to side. They were basically quite strongly homebound to the site they settled in. And usually they were caught at. And also, I mean, you wouldn't see it here, but there was almost no visiting to the turbine. So the fish mostly stayed at the reefs. And so that's further, this graph is further like on the fidelity. On the left-hand side, you have the comparison of fidelity between like other is like where the fish grouped, like for example at acoustic receivers. In the middle, you have the reef, and at the right, you have the turbine. But keep in mind that at the turbine, there was very low visiting. And you can see that the fidelity is really high. So it's almost equal to 1. And on the right-hand side is the comparison between the different reefs. And you can see that basically we didn't find a strong effect of scour protection. Overall, the fish were very, had a very high fidelity. But it didn't really depend on whether there was scour protection at the reef or not. In terms of behavior, I've put the maps. So if you look at the top right, this is locally inactive, and you can see that it's really centered around the reefs. And the locally active is very similar, while of course the transit is when the fish really moved around. So we really saw local behavior around the reefs. That was extremely clear. And further, we could assess the proportion of hiding in the reef. In the pipes. So here you have the different fish like along the x-axis, and basically you have the proportion of hiding. So you can see that it fluctuates, but it's around 50%. And we saw a strong effect like over like the seasons, with a large hiding in winter and much less hiding like at the end of summer, for example. And also a strong correlation with current speed, with a higher current speed leading to more hiding, like probably explained like through an energy expenditure point of view. As for the lobsters, we had much less success. I mean, the animals stayed at the site much less, and this is what it's showing. So basically, number of days in the x-axis, and on the y-axis is the number of observed individuals, like as percentage. And you can see that over like 5 days, it dropped to like 20%, like for the first deployment, and like to 30% of the second deployment. So the animals really didn't settle in the area. Okay, I think I will speed up a bit. And this is a map that similarly to what I showed with the different sites and for the different lobsters, and you can see it's extremely patchy. So basically the animals were a little bit all over the place and didn't really settle in the area. And I did a similar thing, just applying some hidden Markov models to infer behavior. And so there was no clear like clustering around reefs, but we could get some timelines of the different behaviors. And here I show like the animals that displayed like some settlement somehow in the area. But if we further focus on the one that really displayed like some consistent behavior, you can see that the animal arrived, he was hiding, and then he was hiding and locally inactive and eventually left the area. But I think the main message is we didn't really have a lot of consistent behavior, like because the animals were translocated. So some conclusions for the code: we had very strong residency and fidelity and local behaviors, large hiding in structures, and clearly no effect of this scour protection, which means the structures were more attractive features than like the scour protection feature. As for the lobsters, we successfully applied telemetry and the models, but we saw very low settlement. And basically, this lack of residency really limited the analysis we could do because of the lack of replication. Yes, and last, I'd like to acknowledge all the team, and especially Ørsted, for funding the study and being so helpful in the work at sea. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we had 4 talks spanning from bats to birds, from porpoises to fish and lobster. And now I think the 4 presenters, please come here. Can we use these microphones or? Please forward any questions. Umberto, you know, if there's no volunteer, I have to pick one. Please.
Yes, hi, good morning. Just a question to the last presenter regarding the hot movement. So you mentioned that you hot them in the area. So the hot is already there. There's no intrusion from outside, or maybe there is, but you don't know that. But then when you take away the reef, do you have information from after that? Did they leave the area, or did they go to the scout protection then?
No, we don't. We didn't take out the reefs. The reefs are still in the water as we speak. Yeah, and they will remain there. So there was no like after effect.
Umberto.
I have also a question about the last study. For the lobsters, was there consistency in the age of the lobsters? So you had different age groups, and if you expect a difference in case the translocation happened at different stage of the life cycle?
They were similar age, and we had a balance between male and females. So they were also roughly the same size. So I don't think there will be a strong effect. Maybe between male and female. And I remember looking at this, but the data were so patchy, it was very difficult to assess.
Yes, thank you. I have a question for the 2 first presenters. Do you think we should model bats in offshore wind farms? And are the models developed for birds for offshore wind farms applicable for
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I think that for bats, for example, for my model, which I know, we do not have trajectories data. We have occurrences data, so we know if bats frequented a certain zone or not at certain points. So I don't think those kind of approach are appropriate, considering the data set we have on bats and the fact that they are so small, we won't be tracking them by GPS anytime soon. But I probably let the bat expert speak a bit more.
No, you were in the right way. Yes, we could, but as it's really hard to track bat movements because they're really small. We can do that with just a few species in a proper way that they can show us what areas are bats using, and sometimes we don't expect them to fly so high as they do, or so low as we don't expect. So we should, but I don't know if we have enough data for the modeling. We could do it with what we have, but it is a bit hard with bats always.
One in the back, please.
On the topic of the artificial reefs, particularly with the cod, what were your conclusions about the design features in terms of like void dimensions?
And for sure, it was a good. It worked as a good hideout for the fish. It's hard to compare with other designs because we didn't have a baseline or a comparison. But we saw like clear hiding, strong residency, strong fidelity. So I would say like this type of design with crevices of this size, so 0.5 meter to 1 meter, was highly effective and highly attractive for the fish for sure. Like we really saw like almost no jump to the turbine. So they were really like, yeah, as I said, attracted and resident. So yeah, comparing with those designs, I don't know, but for sure that design was like very effective and attractive.
Please.
Yeah, I have a question to you, Springtemper, regarding the harbor porpoises. You mentioned that you can see the vessel movements on the seaports when they are passing. What's the distances, or do you know, have you analyzed the distances between the vessels passing and the seaports? So where are the shipping lanes and which distances to the wind farm?
Yeah, we didn't do the analysis yet of tracking individual vessels and see how that correlates with harbor porpoise presence. But we are doing it at the moment in the continuation of the study. And so we are comparing now the data, the harbor porpoise detections with AIS analysis to really combine that with the noise and see what the effect is on harbor porpoise, if you can see a correlation.
Right, thank you. Please.
Just a very quick follow-up on that. Are vessels then not allowed at all to pass through the wind farm? I'm not sure I caught that in your presentation. Are they allowed to go through them or not, just as a transit route, or do the vessels have to avoid the wind farm?
No, there is a corridor which they can pass through, but within the wind farm lots, they are not allowed. It's only maintenance vessels.
All right.
I have a question for the first presentation. Did you when you calculated the volume, did you calculate it by species in your forest, or did you assume the forest has the same species? And if so, the question is, I think it is the same importance to bats for the occupation, the different species that you have in your forest?
Yes, that's actually a great question. The location that we were analyzing is suitable for bats. So the habitats, the species that we have there are suitable. But yes, that should be the next level, the next layer you put on the map. So you have the volume, but then you analyze is the habitat suitable for certain species which use forest habitats. So yes, that's a good point, and this was just to show the volume, and then the other step, the next step would be to show the if it's suitable for bats and which species. of course. This was suitable for Bechstein's bat and, I don't know, some really forest-dwelling species. So that's why we focused on that, because we knew that it's suitable. We already had detection of species, forest-dwelling species, so we just wanted to check what we've lost already. So, yeah.
Please go ahead.
I have a question for Sophie about the proxy, using the proxy of chlorophyll for the food. So what do you think about it? And do you have some data that you could use to evaluate how, well, if it is enough or if you absolutely need more fish, by example?
So you hit exactly where it hurts because the researcher which works for me on my PhD does not believe in chlorophyll as a proxy for food, and some others I met are very hardcore believer in it. So I know it's much debated. That's why I always hesitate to include it, but there are some studies showing it. So it would not be on our priority list in the model. What I mentioned would be applicable, like we remove a colony from the model training, and we train the model with chlorophyll map. If adding the chlorophyll map actually make our prediction better, we might think, there might be something to it. But that will be as far as we go in terms of explaining if there is something into it. So that is what I would try, at least with my model, but I know it's a hard question in the scientific community.
All right. First in the background.
Another question for Sophie. Have you considered adding data on wind as environmental data to your model? And if so, are there any preliminary results?
So it's one of the first one we wanted to include. The problem of wind is that we have to consider at which spatial and temporal scale we want it to be included. The most believable thing would be to have all the time steps and all the map of wind, because it's a very local contribution to seabirds movement, but that's a big for the model at the moment with the data that we have. Probably we will just be overfitting on what we have. But if we want to, at the opposite, do like winds at a monthly basis, for example, or weekly basis, the problem is that our maps are too similar. And because we have one wind map for one bathymetry map, how do we check if the model understood from one and the other? So we have this difficulty in wind, that's why I didn't show it there, but it's a work in progress. I definitely try to include it in the model.
I have a question for regarding the COTS again, what kind of scour protection was installed in the wind farm? I know another research and development study which shows that the COT presence is also depending on the material which was used for scour protection.
I will have to come back to you later, please. I will check at the break. Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
All right.
About artificial reefs as well. How long did you catch the cod after installation of the artificial reef? How much time was in between?
I mean, the wind farm was built in 2020, Q4 of 2020, and we started the study in July. So we took about 6 months, 6 to 8 months. Yeah, 8 months. Yeah.
Did you thought about catching the lobster locally as well?
No. So that's what I was mentioning. The lobsters, they were translocated. For the first batch, they were bought in from Ireland, and the second batch, they were bought from the Netherlands. But there were move sites.
It might be interesting to catch them.
I know. But there was concerns like not to catch any. That was a problem. Yeah.
All right, one.
I guess also the reef wasn't really designed for lobsters, was it? I mean, as a good sort of hiding place, especially if you consider molting activities and all these things. Was it more designed for cod in the first place, or how did you design the reef itself?
Yeah, that is more a question to Ørsted. I was not really involved in the design process, but I'm not sure there was a strong consideration for one species or another. I think it was more cod, but yeah.
usually scour protection doesn't only serve lobsters. They have also function for the turbines. So we have to keep that in mind. All right. Umberto,
One
please.
for you. In the next phase, are you analyzing any other parameter inside and outside, like food availability? And is there any data you can get from the sound level, like sound of the fish, that you can identify maybe with AI or anything else?
Yeah, it would be really interesting to look at those more biological sounds. But at the moment, it's mostly focusing on, because the research is focused on harbor call voice, so the noise is really monitored to look at disturbance of those animals, to really have an input to that statistical model. But the data will be available, so if anyone wants to do something else with it, it's possible. Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, we could allow one more question. Otherwise, we are getting a slight advantage at the lunch buffet. Because we are 3 minutes before time, so many thanks to all the speakers.